Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Sarah McAllister. I am the Senior Associate Director here in the Office of Alumni and Career and Professional Development in the Office of Alumni Relations. We're so excited to have you here today. Before I introduce our speaker and the topic, I want to go over a few logistics. First, as you're joining and we're getting started, feel free to put your name in the chat and where you're joining from. This is being recorded, so it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which our Senior Director, Nicole Bush, will be adding in the chat in a bit. Also, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to direct message Nicole. She will be doing our tech support today. So I believe with that, I want to hand it over to Linda Greenfield. She is one of our career coaches in our career coach referral network. So I know that she'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. But I'm so excited to have her here today and to talk about this great and interesting topic. We were chatting a bit before we started on just the importance of remote hybrid work, proximity bias, what employees and managers need to know. I know she's spent a lot of time on researching this topic, and I'm so excited to have her here. So Linda, I'll let you take it away, and thank you for being here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So welcome, wonderful alums. Really happy that we're all here to talk about this topic. Interesting topic and definitely a timely topic. I think this is just the start of the conversation on this topic. I think as more teams do become blended, as more time goes by, as more data is collected, that this topic is even going to grow in importance from where it is now. And just to mention, if you Google this topic, you're getting, 37,000 hits. So it is a topic to be talked about. So just an overview of agenda. We'll talk about what it is. Really want to talk a little bit about why everyone is here. Talking briefly about some of the data that's around now, and then looking from 3 different perspectives. So if you're an individual contributor, an employee, what are some of the possible outcomes of proximity bias? What are some of the strategies that you can use? And then we'll break a little bit for discussion. Same thing for managers and senior leaders. What are some of the outcomes? What are some of the strategies? And then discussion. And then just one slide on just what are the key takeaways from today. So what is it? So it is the tendency to give preferential treatment to people in the immediate vicinity. So when you think about a hybrid workplace, typically refers to a difference in leaders' attitudes, often unconscious, between employees working from home and those working in the office. So the idea of proximity equals access, equals opportunity. And just to note that this is not new, this whole idea of proximity bias, because humans were social creatures, and we're naturally wired to think more highly of people that we interact with more regularly. So when you think way back, tribal days, how did tribes happen? People who lived together, who interacted together, grouped together. Even when you think about things in the past, there was something called headquarter bias. Maybe some of you have heard about this. So this was the idea that people who worked in a company's headquarters were the recipient of proximity bias, as opposed to people who worked in remote offices. So way back before there was remote work, there were remote offices that people worked in. So the idea of blended teams, where some people are working remote, some are in office, and some are hybrid, are continuing to happen, and we'll continue to face some of these challenges. So I really want to know, why you are here. So I wanted to ask if you would put in the chat if you're here as an employee, an individual contributor, and you're here because you've seen other people get this, be the recipient of having some of this proximity bias, not you, but other people. So just if you would put in the chat, just say, yes, that's me. I'd be really curious how many people, that's why. So in terms of what are we seeing, and Sarah, a few people from that?
Looks like we've got 2 so far.
Okay, just out of curiosity, you're an employee. You've been the recipient, a lucky recipient, and you're kind of concerned about it. You're wondering, I'm getting the advantage, but is this really right? So if this is you, say, yep, that's me, I'm the recipient. A few more there.
So we're actually getting some really interesting comments that I wanted to share with you. So one says, just open to learning more about the remote dynamics in today's world. Somebody else, into your previous question about, seeing others receive this. Yes, absolutely. There's an assumption that those working remotely aren't really working.
Yes, yes. So absolutely. So, we'll talk about that too, and some of the things that have come up data-wise. So, people who are just curious about the topic too. So for people who are managing others or senior leaders, so are you recognizing this in yourself? Does anyone want to put in the chat that they're concerned that, they're the ones doing it? And do you want to acknowledge? I don't know if anyone's gonna respond with that.
So there was one additional comment that says that this particular person has been working remotely for years and haven't felt that bias themselves, but as a consultant, they are recognized by contribution. So not really, and this is no little politics, right? So that's interesting too on the consulting side.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So any other managers, senior leaders that you've seen other people doing this? It's not you, but you're aware that it is alive and well in your organization. Are we seeing some people with that as well?
One person said that they're not seeing it and they're not experiencing, or they're not showing proximity bias. Somebody else said, yes, they've seen and heard from others. So a bit of a mix.
Yeah, so interesting. And then people are just curious about the topic because this is definitely a topic. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data. There's a lot of data out there. I picked a couple of things to share. So this is a recent survey, nice sample size, white collar workers in 2022. So, absorb this one. 40% of executives ranked potential inequities between remote and in-office employees as number one concern. That's huge. So it's on people's radar. And this one too, 43% of workers believe that working on site would be better for their careers. The impact of that one. Another one, a little bit older. So this is SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management, over 4,000 people surveyed. So look at this one. 70% of supervisors believe remote workers are more easily replaced than on-site. So that does carry huge implications. This one, 42% of supervisors sometimes forget about remote workers when assigning tasks. So this makes me think maybe there's something about right-sizing your team if you don't really need everyone. I'm kind of curious about that, but forgetting about remote workers, that's a little scary. This one, 75% of supervisors say they prefer everyone work on site. So we've seen this in the news. Think Elon Musk Think about some of the big Wall Street banks that are requiring people to come back. So, this is happening, too. This one a little bit older. So this is when lockdown was really starting to happen. And this was tech workers, but some data about who was being promoted and salary increases. So promoted at the same rate, but remote worker salaries grew more slowly. And that at companies where remote work was not very common, those working remotely won fewer promotions. So, this is interesting as the data starts coming in for what's going on now, because, in the past 6 months, there's been a huge shift of more people coming in and blended teams becoming more of a big thing. So this is a whole nother consideration. So the impact of proximity bias on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what's going on with that. So the question is, who is in the office and who isn't? So this will, of course, vary quite a bit based on each individual organization, but a little bit of data on this. And what are the implications of this in terms of preference? And are we really seeing this happen? Men versus women. So, and there is data on this, that there are more women working remotely than men. And that doesn't surprise me when you think about the data on who's doing more in the home and things like that. With kids, doesn't surprise me. And then thinking about other groups, what about when I'm mentioning lower income employees? Some lower income employees don't have a choice. Thinking about restaurant workers, factory workers may have to go in. But when you think about new employees, so people just starting out their careers, maybe at lower salary levels, and commuting costs, there's definitely a cost from that. Who's going in and who's not, and then other protected groups as well. And this is an issue, and I'm going to mention this a number of times today in terms of legal ramifications. So remote workers now are not in a legally protected class, like women, minorities, older workers, people with disabilities. But, this is remote workers are not now in a protected class. And will that change? And my opinion is that it depends what happens, because if there's a lot of inequities going on, there may be a change in protected class. Be interesting to see. So let's shift and talk about employees, individual contributors. So what are some of the things that could be happening to employees if there is this proximity bias going on? Are there inequities in mentors and advocates? So mentors and advocates, hugely important to everyone's career. I think this is something that everyone really needs to think about in terms of looking for mentors and advocates. And are there inequities going on in this area? Information flow. So is there a difference in information flow between employees who are working on site and those who are working remotely? Who's getting the best assignments? Salary increases, promotions. Are there inequities going on in either of those? So strategies, if you suspect this is going on, what are some of the things that can be done? First, is it real? Is this really going on? And that's a question too to think about. So to start with auditing the situation and recording your observations of what's going on, start there. And then talking to people. Ask your peers what they've noticed. Is it the same thing that you've noticed? So we'll talk a lot about virtual meetings because there's a lot of discussion about this topic, but asking colleagues, are they seeing that people who are participating in meetings when they're remote and others aren't, are they seeing the remote employees having trouble being heard? So the idea of getting the conversation started. So this is one of the key takeaways, we'll get to at the end, but the idea of starting the conversation about this topic, whether you think it's going on in your company or not, but just getting the awareness going with your manager, potentially with HR, with other people, but then thinking too, if you're working remotely and you feel that there is some of this going on, is to proactively try to get some more FaceTime, virtual FaceTime if you're remote, but asking for some meetings. Thank you. Maybe weekly, whatever works. And here too, this idea of mentors is proactively being the one to seek out mentors, not just to talk about this topic, but for everything going on in your career and how important they are. So the whole topic of virtual meetings, what can you do? So contributing is huge. You want to make sure that you're not forgotten. So contributing really, really important. So a number of strategies along this topic. So looking at the agenda in advance and then reaching out to the organizer or leader of the meeting and asking if they'll let you contribute at a specific spot on a specific topic. And it's known as, pass the baton strategy. So if you've got that commitment that you can contribute, you have something you want to contribute, and you can contribute at a particular point, you'll make sure that you're going to be heard. And it also gives you a little bit of authority and respect that the baton has been passed to you. So turn on your camera. This is something else that I think is really important too. So I don't know if anyone's heard of the 7% rule. So this has been in existence a long time. Research done on this a long time ago and validated over time. So the idea of communication, all communication, only 7% of that is the actual words that you say. 93% of it is the way you say it and your nonverbal communication, everything else. So I could perhaps put in 2 sentences of Big Latin, and only 7% of the people on this Zoom meeting would notice. So the idea of that. So in virtual meetings, putting the camera on and engaging. So the person who's leading the virtual meeting too, and they're looking at all the pictures of people who are there, the leader is going to focus on the people who are engaged, who are nodding, who are interested, who are leaning forward, who are participating. So I did mention to Sarah a funny story before we hopped on. I want to throw it in here too. So it was a story I heard, really at the start of COVID in 2020 about a virtual meeting that was going on, and I believe it was an engineer who did this. What he did is he recorded himself nodding and looking engaged and doing this, recorded himself and put it on a loop and then put that up in the virtual meeting and left. So hopefully he was not called on or anything else, but you know, you do want to be present and participate. Yeah, and remembering that nonverbal communication as well. So you want to be heard in a virtual meeting, you know, use the raise hand feature or physically raise your hand. So the leader, the organizer.
Linda, are we allowed to ask questions?
Sure, yeah,
I
sure.
just have to ask a quick one. I have to ask, is that guy who did that? Because I'm curious about that, right? Because you do see people, and even if they have their camera on, you can tell they're like looking away or looking on their phone. Or I hate when they do this, when they're like doing stuff and you see all this. I just, if I'm like a co-host, I actually will turn their video off. But I just wonder if somebody had a recording of them like, yeah, like that, how long it would take people to notice. Absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question too. I think it depends how many people are on the meeting. You know, if it's huge, an all hands meeting kind of thing versus a small
Right.
team or 3 or 4, I think you're a lot more noticeable. You know, if there's only a couple of you doing it.
Plus, there also is though that the study that shows that as a human, that the thing that we register faster than anything else is a human face. And seeing the gallery on the Zoom can be visually overwhelming and exhausting for the brain because it's sitting there processing so many faces that are close up that it wouldn't do in a normal, natural meeting. I know that I tend to focus my virtual meetings on actions and accountability and active engagement versus just sort of passive content or updates. Do you have and I know you're going to continue, but I'd love to hear some of your recommendations about that and about interviewing for remote opportunities, because I feel like that's a challenge right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, you know, let's talk a little bit more about some of those questions at the very end. But yeah, so very interesting things going on with it in terms of virtual meetings and making sure that you're really focusing on engagement and that focus, that natural reaction to faces, you know, that's documented from babies, you know, babies on. And the whole idea of Zoom exhaustion too is if all you're doing all day is one virtual meeting to the next, you know, it absolutely can be exhausting too. So hopefully you don't have too many of these in one day, but the ones that you have, you want to be, you know, as much as possible, be present and engaging in them. No, absolutely. So using the raise hand or physically raising your hand, typing in the chat function as well that you want to contribute. So if you're having trouble contributing, you know, using that chat function as well. Looking for transition points to contribute. So when there's a transition point in the meeting, good time to interject, you know, great point, but before we move on, I'd like to contribute, I'd like to add something. So it's a natural point to make sure that you can get involved and contribute. Sometimes phrasing things as a question can be helpful, particularly if it's a very senior person, you don't want to interrupt, but saying, do you mind if I jump in and add a couple of thoughts and ideas here? So sometimes that's an easier way to get heard. Okay, so now we do want to open up. So the idea, Team Tulane, you know, what have you experienced yourself? Have you used some of these strategies? Are there others that you've used? So thinking really just employees, not for managers or leaders, you know, what's going on? So to just unmute, do you think that's the best? Or Sarah, do you want to field?
Actually, I wanted to call on Stephanie. I thought the comment that you made earlier about the length of, managers not knowing the length of time that tasks take could be an interesting question.
Right. So one of the things so I'm a consultant, I'm an executive consultant to like successful entrepreneurs and small businesses, and I help them around everything from requirements management to project management to processes, systems, just making their life more effective, easier, predictable success. Right. And so a lot of times they'll have me come in and scrub their meetings and scrub their whatever. And ironically, I'm consulting for not ironically, but I'm consulting for my financial advisor. And what was interesting was realizing that he doesn't have a concept of how long effectively responding to a client request takes, because if we were all in the same room and he was seeing like what was going on, or if he were going around and there were interactive questions that could be asked, I think he would have a better sense of how long the activity takes. But he sort of assumes that things get done. And there is and I think that sometimes I could see where if a manager doesn't have a clear understanding of a job, of the implementation of a job, he or she may not have a good sense of how long things take, because there isn't just that simple passive interaction. It was just something I noticed. Now I'm an over communicator, so at first it sort of frustrated me because he doesn't like to have questions asked and didn't even want to know statuses, and I realized that doesn't work for me. And so I would clarify how things worked and what it took in order for that to be effectively resolved. And so yeah, that was one of the things that I could see in, now that we're switching to a much more like remote acceptable environment, that's one of the things to manage.
No, absolutely. And a really interesting take on that and what you've experienced. So thank you for sharing that. So having those discussions too about, making sure that everyone is heard and that the experiences and the length of time that tasks are taking and everything going on, really, really crucial. Sometimes even, recording a meeting and, playing it back to someone who's leading the meeting when they're observing what's going on, from that third person kind of standpoint, makes them, see different things, kind of thing. So thank you.
Setsa, I saw you raise your hand. You want to ask a question?
Yes, I actually wanted to add to what Stephanie mentioned. I absolutely agree with her. And part of the problem is not just that the managers don't have a concept about how long a task takes, but it just appears to me that with the remote work opportunity, exposed how many managers didn't even know what their employees are actually doing as part of their job. And that was another scary part. So even though we have job descriptions,
Right.
the supervisors really had a very sketchy concept about what it takes for that employee to do their job and what it involves for the employee to do the job.
Yes. So, very interesting comment. So that's where that idea of proactively scheduling those meetings with your supervisor to keep him or her informed and saying, this is what I've been working on. This task took 10 hours. And this is what happened, and this is the result, and these are the challenges, to really make sure that you proactively make sure that your supervisor is informed, so they know what you're doing, they know what the challenges are that you're facing, and the results and the impact that you're achieving. So, be proactive in that would be my suggestion, because I think you're right, particularly supervisors with large teams, they don't know what everyone's doing. But I think, part of that can be on us as employees to make sure that they're informed. And if there's pushback, I don't have, time for a weekly meeting, maybe every other week, or maybe, you proactively sending a status update, brief. So, people don't have a lot of time, but just the idea of keeping your boss informed. Thank you.
And then we have Suzanne has your hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself. Oh, we can't hear you. No, do you want to put it in the chat? No. Go ahead and use the chat. And then while you're putting that in, I know, is it Kirsten? Kirsten? You know.
Thank you. I appreciate this space and this discussion that we're having. And it, for me, it's just putting another check mark to say, one of the things I was hearing from our team, they felt as though, and I understood, did the work before I was promoted, how much time goes into reaching out to patients and the follow-up that's needed, and that back and forth piece. And so one of the things we came up with so that there could be a quantification regarding how many contact attempts there were is I built it into our database. So every time, they're called patient navigators. Every time a patient navigator has a touch point with a patient, in addition to putting their notes and things in their medical record, they have to enter what mode it was that they try to contact the patient. How long did it take for them to do it, whether it was through a secured email, whether it was through telephone contact, and to put all those different touch points in there, because it's one thing if you go through it, but to your point, Linda, sometimes upper management and executive leadership are not aware of how much time it actually takes when you're on the phone and you call someone and then you hang up, somebody else calls, now they're calling for you in Spanish, and now you just let Spanish interpretation off the line, and now you have to get them back on the line, and a lot of that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. No, absolutely. You know, the idea of keeping your supervisor informed, you know, I just think that's a, you know, not even proximity bias, whether you're all in office or anything, is the person you're reporting to who's writing your performance appraisal needs to know what you're doing and how long things take, and you know that the results and outcomes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Suzanne, you want to try again? Oh, wait, she put it in the chat. Okay. Thank you. Will we be emailed a recording? Yes. And then the next question is, how do you feel about requiring attendees to take advantage of training videos about the platform? Zoom, like example is a Zoom training video, and or making the first meeting a training. I get so frustrated when people still don't know how to navigate the platform. That's it. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really, really good idea, particularly if a company is implementing a new platform. But absolutely, and new employees, it should be a part of onboarding, because whatever systems the company is using, people who are new to the company, you know, need to know how to do that. So totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great question. So we've got two more. Stephanie, you want to ask your question?
Well, and this is just a quick follow-up to both what Kirsten said, and let me get her name. Is it Setsa? Did I get that right? I hope I got that close.
Yes, perfect. That's it.
Okay, perfect. Is one of the things that I do when I work with the management team and the employees is I work with the management team to say, what does done look like for any task? What do you consider to be the criteria that proves that something is done? Like the training of how to do it is a separate thing, but you tell me what you consider done to look like, because that shows me what management thinks are the important criteria. And then I take that back, like Kirsten said, to the people actually doing the work. And I'm like, is this what really matters? Like, this is what matters to your boss, but is there something else that they're not taking into consideration that's critically important? And I think that's extra important when we're interacting with customers. Absolutely, that there's a human element. Like when I support usually when I'm supporting a customer about one issue, they'll ask me, when they find out how effective that I am, they want me to do like 17 other things while they have me on the line, you know, kind of thing. And of course do it, but not necessarily against a criteria. And I also agree, Linda, with what you said about as remote workers or as any workers of any job that anybody does, it's our responsibility to have a clear documented statement of literally what we do every day, whether that's an action log or however you want to manage that. But there should never be an assumption that they should just know how we spend our time.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree, Stephanie. And, thank you for that. Absolutely. And I love it that you're the go-between, because there could be very big differences to what complete or success looks like to the, manager and to the employee, and really having that discussion of what's the difference and how do you deal with that? And even if that were just, people that were all in office, the idea of, what does done look like? What does success look like? Need to be on the same page. Absolutely. Thank you.
And then David, if you want to ask your question, if you want to come off mute.
Sure, thank you. I saw the comment about someone using their phone, and yes, guilty. I'm using my phone because I'm not in my office, and I have a meeting to go to immediately after this. But something that 2 years ago, I started working remotely for the government, and I used an old tactic that I learned from my days in the Army, which was sending up what we call a sit rep, which is short for a situation report, which is nothing more than a quad chart with current items I'm working on, long-term. And the third quadrant would have issues, concerns, and then admin notes. And what I discovered that as long as I was putting out measures of performance, then later on, I could tailor that to the so what, the effectiveness of these tasks that I'm doing. And sending this in weekly to my boss gave me a record of 52 weeks of this that I could then incorporate into my evaluation support form, which would be used for. So I'm not trying to figure out what I did back in February that I want my boss, who's not looking over my shoulder, to know and to recall, because I'm sure with many people to oversee, he or she is not going to remember all these things unless they really just stand out for the organization. And I was just wondering if you or anyone else had used a similar tactic with yourselves, or something else that maybe I could glean from it all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That is something that I recommend to all the clients that I'm working with, to keep track of their activities, absolutely. Just so they have it for things like performance reviews, for if they're looking for promotions or a salary increase. And even just, a little bit aside from this topic, but also keeping track of kudos. So anytime someone has said something really nice to you, someone has written something nice to you, whether it's someone in the company or a customer, or anyone that you interact with, keeping a list of those, and also a list of results. So what is the impact that you have? And are you able to measure it? So measurable results, even better. And that information is great for performance reviews, for salary discussions, some of these things to incorporate into a resume, a LinkedIn profile, to use in interviewing. So, just the idea of having a really good handle on not only what is it that you're doing, or did this year, but did you do it well? Did you have results? Were you acknowledged for it too? All of those factors are really, really good things to keep track of. And this topic, even extremely relevant for people who are not on site. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll go on, and we may just go through to the end, and then have the discussion for managers and senior leaders, for everyone kind of at the end, to make sure we work through. So for managers, what are some of the possible outcomes? So if this is going on and you're the manager, what's the impact on your team's performance? So, is this happening? If you're showing bias to the people who are in close proximity to you, what's happening to the morale of your team, particularly the ones who aren't. Is there less employee engagement? What's happening to the output and the quality of work? And is there increased turnover on your team because of this? And, the big question, how does that impact your performance as a manager? If part of what you do as a manager is to utilize your team in the best possible way. And if this is going on because you're showing bias to the ones who are closest to you, what effect does that have on your performance? Again, are there legal ramifications of that? So things that you can do if you are a manager, first in recognizing, your own proximity bias. So the idea of intentionally being aware of yourself and self-monitoring your own actions. So documenting when and how you engage with your team, both on-site and virtually, and look for, are there any disparities? So really having that intentional self-awareness. Starting the conversation. So, this is huge, recognizing, is there something going on, and starting the conversation. So asking the people that report to you, do they feel the playing field's level? Talking with your peers, other people in the organization, talking with the people above you, having this conversation with HR. And if you think about, if you're a manager now and want to progress in management, if you're an employee who wants to be a manager, and when you think about how to get there and how to move up, the idea of taking those, best assignments, those stretch assignments, yes, also positioning yourself and showing that you're thinking about things at a higher level than your job description, also critically important to moving up. So, this is one of those topics, maybe out of your pay grade, so to speak, but, is this something that you want to start the conversation with? So strategies to manage a blended team, take this as a goal, make it your goal to level the playing field. This idea, and that some of this has just come up in the discussion, focusing on outcomes, not face time. And sometimes you can't measure the outcomes, or there's reasons that the outcomes might not be as you expected. So the idea of focusing on the situation, what's going on as well, but taking the focus away from face time. Role model that remote work is acceptable. So the idea, maybe if you have been in the office as a manager, a leader, maybe not being in the office every day. Do not make decisions without the entire team. So this is important because if you're in the office as a manager, a leader, part of your team is you're talking by the water cooler over lunch, you make some decisions, you allocate assignments. The idea is you're leaving out people, the people on your team who aren't there. Educate yourself. So this is one of the ideas too. There's tons of learning opportunities out there. This is from LinkedIn Learning. Just to mention, you can get LinkedIn Learning for free with an upgraded account. LinkedIn will give you a free account for a month. Day 1 of month 2, they charge your credit card. But also one of the go-arounds for LinkedIn Learning is through your local library. So here in LA, I believe it's my city library card, not my county one, gives me access to all of LinkedIn Learning. And this is great. When you complete something, it automatically goes on your LinkedIn profile for the world to see. So, a good place to think about, additional education. So more strategies. So the idea of team events where everyone is there. So, when lockdown first started, 2020, huge rise in the virtual happy hour. Seemed like everyone was having virtual happy hours. But the idea of maybe, taking it a step further and thinking about some other kinds of events that your team could participate in, everyone virtually. The idea of volunteer projects, I'm particularly fond of this idea because there's been research done on this as well that shows that when a team is engaged in an activity that's bigger, greater than themselves and what they normally do, that they form a more cohesive team, which is good. So I really like this idea as well. So if you're a manager or a leader, invite your employees to either on-site if possible, if they can, or even a virtual lunch. You both have to eat, you're both going to take some amount of time to eat lunch. So the idea, if it does need to be virtual, to have that virtual lunch date, if you will, and even if it's just chatting about whatever, they're getting that FaceTime with you, you're getting to know them better in terms of making sure that you don't have that proximity bias. You being the one to proactively say, I'm going to have check-ins with everybody. Another good point here, considering time zones when you're scheduling your meetings or when you're making important announcements. So if you're in New York and you drop something at 8 a.m. New York time, critical piece of information, your California team, they're not even aware for a few hours. So the idea of being careful when you think about scheduling those meetings, but also when you're making announcements. So this digital asynchronous communication. So the idea here in terms of leveling the playing field is to use some of these tools, whether it's Slack or Teams, Google Docs, lots of different asynchronous communication tools. But like we saw before, that 7% rule, only 7% is the actual words. I really love this suggestion. So if possible, if you have a big piece of information that you want to communicate, record yourself communicating that piece of information and send it out to everyone at the same time. That can help to level the playing field for one, but also that 93% of the communication, that's not the words that are going into a Slack chat kind of thing, to make sure that everyone really does understand what you're saying. So strategies for virtual meetings too. So I like this one as well. Prepare employees before meetings. So the idea of telling everyone that you really encourage participation and make it known, the expectation, no side conversations. So the idea too is that if some people are in office and some people are not, that the people who are in office are not having these side conversations that everyone is not privy to. Using whiteboard shared document, using hand raising chat, hand raising virtual or physical. So the idea of potentially making it all virtual. So even the employees who are there on site, the idea of not having everyone in a conference room when you're going to have a meeting, but make everyone log on. And that way the playing field is absolutely level. Record the meeting for people who can't be there. So I want to go through some of the enterprise-wide, and then we'll have discussion just in case people need to hop off. Some enterprise-wide outcomes. So these same things that we just saw for management for leaders, are these happening enterprise-wide in your company? And what does that mean in terms of legal? Bigger legal if it's enterprise-wide and these things are happening. But what else is happening with the bottom line, with their stock price, with company ratings? So if there is a lot of turnover, if all of your remote employees are leaving, are they trashing the company on social media, on Glassdoor? And is that impacting the company's ability to attract and retain talent? And that is going to cycle. That's going to be a vicious cycle, difficult to get out of. So some strategies, start the conversation. That idea, asking everyone to discuss and to create the solutions. So if there's participation in the solutions, there's buy-in, more people on board. Monitor who's working where and monitor outcomes. Who is getting promoted to stretch assignments? What are the employee attitudes about all of this? Level the playing field with tech, audit, upgrade if you need to, use a central platform, make sure that all information is being shared. So changing the culture is not easy, and using catchphrases is not going to do it, but the action behind these phrases. So saying that we have people who are on site, we have people who are remote, and we believe in excellence from anywhere. And this is how we demonstrate that value that we have. The same for remote first. Doesn't matter where you are. We'll think of everyone as remote, and this is how we demonstrate that company value. So, the idea of requiring everyone to join meetings virtually, and Microsoft and Google are encouraging this now, not requiring it. A number of other companies as well, and maybe even enterprise-wide, requiring all employees to not be in the office every day as an idea. A little bit more role model, remote work is acceptable. Have some in-person meetings if you can. Maybe enterprise-wide, require every manager to have some additional education, taking courses. HubSpot is one that's running their own workshops. Other companies, you can bring it in-house, run some workshops. The idea of focusing not on FaceTime and having quantifiable 360-degree merit reviews. You don't want to kick the bucket down the line, but the idea of having a central person who brings all of this together in terms of strategies and impact and everything else. This is a new title, a new job. So I want to just do the takeaways quickly. Awareness, really important to be aware of this issue, get the conversation starting. Even if there are, you're not sure if this is happening, put strategies in place now so it doesn't happen. Or if it is happening, start to work on it, implement some of those strategies, monitor, hugely important, what's going on, and then adjust when you see the data. So maybe we have a few minutes left for those who don't need to hop off. So additional, particularly for managers and leaders too, viewpoint there to see what else is going on. So are there people in the chat or raising their hand?
Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
I'm like raising my hand too much. Clearly, this is a topic that affects my life greatly. One of the things is there are a lot of meetings, especially in like corporate environments, where you have a round robin of people who will give updates. And there are some people who respect time and there's some people who don't. And there's an app on Zoom that you can get. It's free and it's just called Timer.
Yeah.
And so like, let's say that the person who's running the meeting says, okay, everybody, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Yeah.
Or 1 minute to speak. You can actually have the timer just sitting there in the corner to help. And because there's some people who really respect it and there are some people who don't. And when you're sitting in these meetings and you don't know how long they're going to go, it can be really valuable. So I have actually found having this, people they see it, like nobody has to say like your time is up. They literally see it and self-regulate, and it can make the other participants want to pay more attention because they know that that there is this kind of control to the meeting. It's just a little thing. Like sometimes these administrative things make a huge difference.
Oh, thank you for that. I totally agree with that. Absolutely. I've been in meetings with this and I completely agree. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. Absolutely agree. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you. Really good idea. Anything else from the chat? Any other conversations?
Yeah, Stephanie, I don't know if you saw the chat, but I add to Kirsten's request of if you could share that. Oh, great. Thank you so much. Well, I know we have 2 minutes left. So actually, if people think of questions later, Linda, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. So this is my contact information, my website. Please contact me with any questions, anything else. I have to put this in. I am a very proud alum and miss New Orleans all the time. So happy to answer any questions. Anything else going on, please do contact me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for the great discussion and idea sharing. And with that, Linda, do you want to just send us off with some final words?
So the only thing, thinking about those key takeaways. So, and taking them back to your company as well. And the last thing is lots of great information and lots of great webinars on this professional development series at Tulane. So I would say monitor that as well. I'm sure if there's topics that you're really interested in, to pass that along as well to Sarah and Nicole, because I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to be Team Tulane and interact and learn from each other and get more information and knowledge. So that's
Thank
kind
you,
of the
Linda.
end. Yeah.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Yeah. Take care. All right. Bye.